Hi there guys, and welcome to every episode of The Simpsons Season 12 reviewed. I have recovered from the somewhat painful Season 11, and I'm now ready to do this one. And I can only hope that this will improve on last season. And in fairness, I do remember this season being a superior one to 11, but honestly, anything that is somewhat fun to watch I will take at this point. In terms of some brief background for this season, this is the final time that we have the pleasure of having Mike Scully as a showrunner. He has been in the role since season 9, and I'm kind of used to his wacky style by now. In a way, it will be a shame to see him go. There were also a few changes in the writing staff, in that 3 writers left the show, only to be replaced by 3 new ones. Maybe it worked, because a fair few of the episodes in this season were nominated for some kind of award. Not like that necessarily means much, but it is interesting nonetheless. Anyway, before we get into the episodes, I would, as ever, like to thank the Simpsons wiki for their help with the trivia here. With that done, into Season 12 we go. Season 12, Episode 1, Treehouse of Horror XI. The 3 short stories this year are Ghost Dad, Scary Tales Can Come True, and Night of the Dolphin. So, some trivia for the season opening is that the title of the first part is a reference to the 1990 comedy film Ghost Dad, whereas the final part is a parody of the 1973 science fiction film The Day of the Dolphin. My best moment was the fight between the humans and the dolphins. So this is the second time in a row that we open a season with a Treehouse of Horror episode. This time it gets a 4 out of 5. I found this one to be fairly solid throughout. The first part had Homer dying as his horoscope foretold. It was good to try and guess how he would actually end up dying, given all the things that happened to him. I loved how after surviving things falling on him and the bite from a snake, it is simply eating broccoli that finally does him in. Also, when he gets brought back down to earth in ghost form, the first thing that Homer does is eat broccoli for a second time. That was funny and the best gag of part 1 by far. The premise of him having to do one good deed to get into heaven was not very original though, and the ending of him being denied entry to heaven because the angel wasn't looking was kind of lame. In terms of part 2, I don't actually have that much to say about it. It was just a by the numbers parody of fairy tales. In terms of the jokes in this part, the pick of the bunch was Homer ripping out Rapunzel's hair because of his weight. The joke about the witch actually having a boyfriend all along though was one I saw coming a mile away. The final part is probably the best known of the 3 and it is also my favourite, just because it is the least predictable out of the 3. The fact that Lisa setting a dolphin free from a tank ends up with them rising up to dethrone humanity is pretty interesting. As I said, I like the fight scene between the humans and the dolphins. And I also like the atmosphere that led up to it with the dolphins just standing around menacingly. They really did want it more than the humans, because the ending had the Simpsons family casually floating in the sea. Overall, this episode was just about a 4 because while it had no real excellent or standout moments, it was solid all the way through, and that is all I can ask for really to kick off the season. Season 12, Episode 2, A Tale of Two Springfields. After Homer discovers that Springfield has 2 different area codes, he ends up leading a revolt that splits the town into 2. So, this is the 250th episode of the show. The best moment for me was the performance by The Who. For the 250th episode of the show, we have a not too spectacular 3 out of 5. I think that the premise here of Springfield being divided on a petty issue like an area code is a good one. Now, it was not always executed the best, and I'm not sure that literally putting a wall up through the middle of town was necessary. The pettiness of it all, though, does at least fit the town well, and allows for some funny moments as the 2 parts of town try to one-up each other. I go back and forth on how I feel about Homer here. He does have some good moments, such as his and Bart struggle over a telephone, and the opening scene where he gets attacked by the badger in the doghouse. Other times, though, he gets a bit carried away, and starts acting like an idiot when it's not really appropriate. The main example of it is the whole chloroform obsession that he develops. He even does it to Marge at the end to shut her up. Outside of Homer, there were a few other good lines here though, like Carl talking about this religious world of ours. I also quite liked the Who's guest appearance. They did their job well, and their presence even got the town back together in the end. I just wish they did Pinball Wizard as Homer demanded. In the end, this does just enough to get by, even if the jokes were a bit hit and miss. It is an okay episode, but not a memorable one. Season 12, Episode 3, Insane Clown Poppy. After Krusty finds out that he has a daughter, the 2 start to spend time together. However, he loses her trust after gambling away her violin, prompting Homer and Krusty to go and retrieve it. So some trivia for this one is that originally, Homer was the one that was going to have a long lost daughter, but early on in production, this was changed to Krusty. And to be honest, I am glad that they changed it. It would have been really weird to have Homer have a long lost daughter after all this time. My best moment was Homer and Krusty sneaking into the Mafia's house. This one gets a 2 out of 5. The first act of this one could not have been much more boring. You have Homer and Bart messing about with fireworks, which results in Lisa's room being destroyed. To make it up to her, they take a trip to a book festival, which churns out some lame jokes, including a mediocre appearance from Stephen King. Once we actually get on to the main story, things do improve slightly. While Krusty being a horrible person is nothing new, and his daughter is a pretty bland character, they do at least manage to build up some kind of connection between them. Krusty taking parenting tips from Homer is pretty funny, and it is nice to see them have a good time together at the beach. Krusty betting her violin on a poker game is kind of meh, but it does at least allow for a few good scenes where he and Homer go to retrieve it. I like the firefight between the Mafias, and Johnny Tightlips has a good line after he is shot. Tell a doctor to suck a lemon. The ending does have Krusty and Sophia making up, but she never becomes an important character on the show in the future, so it doesn't really matter too much really. To be honest, this is just very forgettable. So much so that before I rewatched it for this review, I actually forgot this episode's existence. And when you combine that with some bad out of place jokes, it is reason enough to give this a 2. Season 12, Episode 4, Lisa the Tree Hugger. Eager to join environmentalist group at first, Lisa attempts to prove her worth by camping out in a giant redwood, destined for logging. So some trivia is that when a giant log destroys Kentucky Fried Panda, Homer exclaims, "No, it was finger ling ling good." This is of course a reference to the Kentucky Fried Chicken slogan, finger licking good. My best moment was The Rich Texan. This one got a 4 out of 5. I found that the story here, while pretty simple, was very solid. We have a fun little intro, which has Bart delivering Thai menus as a ninja. From there, we then nicely transition into a Lisa story. Her being awestruck by this charming environmentalist is an interesting dynamic, and I like how they interact throughout the episode. I also just like how Lisa is portrayed in general here. In issues-based plots like this, she does have a tendency to get a bit too preachy and annoying, but she manages to avoid that here. She wants to do the right thing, sure, but she knows her weaknesses and even makes mistakes in the end, which destroys the redwood tree. She also has a sweet moment with her family too, which is nice to see. Now the ending I am kind of more mixed on. I do like how mischievous the Rich Texan is, in how he tries to create a theme park. This is honestly the Rich Texan's best ever appearance on the show in my opinion. He really is a good antagonist here, and he really does make you kind of wanted to see him fail. The way the episode ends though, with Jesse cutting down a tree, and it goes on rolling forever, is kinda weird. Ultimately though, I can forgive that, as it is the only questionable part of the story for me. I also found the jokes above par here. They were also more clever than the typical ones you find in this era. For example, you have the solar panel electric chair which is slowly frying Snake, and Homer doing donuts in his car while going, donuts. My favourite of them all though is Homer taking advantage of everyone thinking that Lisa is dead. I love that audio message that he has Lisa record from Mo, asking him to remove his tab. So yeah, this was pretty good all things considered. Season 12, Episode 5, Homer vs. Dignity. Short on money, Homer approaches Mr. Burns for a raise. Burns grants his request, but only on a condition that Homer acts as his personal jester. So, this episode's plot is similar to the film The Magic Christian, and Mike Scully actually claimed that the reason the episode was critically panned was because not many people had seen the film. My best moment was Homer throwing pudding at Lenny and Carl. This one gets a 2 out of 5, and it is a bit of a shame that I had to give it that rating really, because this did have the potential to be something better. The first half of the episode is pretty decent. I like the dynamic between Burns and Homer. Homer's money problems are set up in the first few minutes, so it is believable that he would do Burns' bidding for cash. Burns is portrayed here as this kind of out-of-touch, eccentric billionaire, and I do think it works well for him. The pranks that he has Homer do are good. He has him buy a $20,000 comic book from Comic Book Guy, only to tear it up in front of him. Comic Book Guy reacting like he's in physical pain because of it is amusing. The best scene in the episode though is the cafeteria scene. I love their casual conversation about a sneeze guard, and how Burns has him chuck pudding at Lenny's injured eye. I also love that he tells Homer off for throwing it at Carl. I wonder what he did to get that much respect from Mr. Burns. Past the halfway point though, things go downhill rapidly. You have the infamous panda scene, which admittedly doesn't bother me that much. It is more just stupid than anything else. My biggest problem actually came from the ending. They tried to make it a happy one, where Homer turns Burns down and proves himself to Lisa. It just doesn't work though, because he lets Burns take control of the float anyway. I mean, everyone ends up being covered in fish guts and being attacked by birds. That doesn't seem like a happy ending to anyone other than Mr. Burns. But despite that, the episode tries to treat it as a happy ending, which is kind of weird and just doesn't work. All in all, this is another okay episode, which is sadly ruined by a few horrible scenes. Season 12, Episode 6, The Computer Wore Menace Shoes. Under the alias Mr. X, Homer starts his own web page and begins revealing Springfield's secrets. However, when he reveals himself in order to claim a Pulitzer Prize, he draws the attention of some mysterious people. So some pretty important trivia is that this episode is both a parody of and homage to the 1960s TV series The Prisoner. Patrick McGowan voices number 6 in the episode, reprising his character from The Prisoner. My best moment was Homer's escape from the island. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. This was definitely a plot of two halves. So much so that I will discuss the first and second half separately. The first half, with Homer setting up a new news/gossip site on the internet, was good. It allowed that more mischievous childlike side of him to come out, which doesn't always work, but on this occasion I enjoyed it. I think the reason it worked for me is that there was a good satire of how the internet can be used for news, and how anyone can say anything, whether it is true or not. And as it came out in December 2000, this episode was well ahead of its time in that regard. For better or worse, I think we are all aware of how the internet is used for news nowadays, and it has probably become even more important than the mainstream media in terms of shaping people's perceptions. Given that I was enjoying how the episode was going, it did seem a bit weird to suddenly switch gears completely in the middle and turn into a TV parody. I mean, they had things like Burns selling uranium to terrorists be a minor plot point that wraps up in a joke. Instead of focusing on something like that as the main crutch of the story, they seem to delight in having Homer trapped on an island getting drugged all the time. Now, I don't hate this parody as much as I could have, because they managed it pretty well, and it does have some funny moments still. I liked Homer escaping from the bubble, for example, and the raft being on his drive when he got home got a laugh out of me, as if to imply that he had sailed all the way from the island to his house. The ending of the Simpsons family being captured is an interesting one. I guess it kind of falls under the Treehouse of Horror non-canon type of ending. I'm not going to call it great or anything, but hey, it was still a different choice, and you should know by now that I do tend to like it when the writers try new things. Overall, this episode is a bit inconsistent, but even so, it was always engaging to me, and when you combine that with some good jokes, this is a worthwhile watch, in my opinion. Season 12, Episode 7, The Great Money Caper. Strapped for cash, Homer and Bart become con artists in order to make some easy money. When Marge and Lisa get wise to their deception, they devise a plan to teach them a lesson. The con artist, Devon Bradley, was portrayed by actor and director Edward Norton, and Scully hired him for the role after James L. Brooks informed him that he was a big fan of the show. My best moment was, Willie wasn't, and I'll explain that in a minute. So this episode gets a 3 out of 5. Yeah, this did end up being a so-so episode in my book, but the road to get there was far from simple. The main plot of Homer and Bart becoming con artists is one which I have mixed feelings about. On one hand, the characterization of them is quite bad. I mean, they are openly being criminals and they take delight in scamming their friends out of money. On the other hand though, Homer and Bart do work together quite nicely, and the scams that they pull off are interesting and entertaining. Overall, much like Homer's claims that the universe does after his scams, this kind of balances out for me in the end. What doesn't balance out though here is the ending. I mean, the ridiculous lengths that the entire town goes to try and teach Homer and Bart a lesson is just dumb. Lisa even points out that it is insulting to our intelligence. But apparently, the writers didn't care, as they just cut to auto surfing and call it a day. The only good thing about that courtroom scene was my favourite moment of Willie revealing that he was left in the dark about the ruse. I found that funny because no one ever seems to tell poor Willie what actually is going on. I guess I also have to mention that there was this very small subplot here about Marge getting addicted to Long Island iced teas. I don't know why it was there, as it served no purpose and got abandoned halfway through. But you know what, I still enjoyed Drunk Marge, so I didn't hate it that much. This was a tough rating to give in the end because the story was yet again very up and down, but I found that the episode had just enough good jokes and moments to redeem itself. Season 12, Episode 8, Skinner's Sense of Snow. When a giant blizzard hits Springfield, it buries Springfield Elementary in snow. The children, fed up of being trapped inside, soon rebel against Principal Skinner. Meanwhile, Homer and Ned attempt to rescue them. So, some trivia is that the episode's title is a pun on a 1997 film, Smiller's Sense of Snow. My favourite moment was the kids taking over the school. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. So this was clearly meant to be a Christmas episode, but it doesn't really have anything to do with Christmas. Instead, the plot is just about some of the regular children characters being trapped in school with Principal Skinner and Groundskeeper Willie. The first act is a bit of a slow burner, with that trip to a circus, and them all sat in class, bored while watching a bad movie. I guess that part is somewhat relatable though, given that that is what often happened on the last day of school before the Christmas holidays. Things do, metaphorically at least, heat up once they get snowed in. Sure, the dynamic of the kids being led by Bart, rising up and taking over from the authority figures, is nothing new, but I do think that they managed to take a new spin on it here. Also, having Skinner harness his old army days is a good idea, and it is fun to watch him rule with an iron fist. It also makes it even more enjoyable when the tables turn and he gets put into a dodgeball bag. Meanwhile, we have a drawn out subplot of Homer and Ned trying to rescue the kids. I was not a big fan of it really, as they spent most of it being stuck in an iced up car. Then they did this dumb scene of Homer leaving the engine on which leads to them hallucinating. Basically, none of the B-plot was funny really, and it only served to have Homer be a jerk to Flanders. The ending of them crashing into the salt silo, thus melting the snow, was kind of meh too. In terms of the jokes, they were fine. I liked the one with Skinner revealing that an elephant ate his whole platoon. You also have a few puns here, such as Willie telling Skinner, "That's the last time you slap your Willie around," and Skinner telling the hamster, "Quick, chew through my ball sack." Now, admittedly, these may be slightly immature puns, but I still found them funny nonetheless. Season 12, Episode 9, HOMR. An X-ray reveals that Homer has had a crayon lodged in his brain since he was 6 years old. Upon removal of the crayon, Homer's intelligence increases greatly, which has a drastic impact on his life. So some trivia is that Osmodiar, a parody of the Great Gazoo from the Flintstones, appears for the second time in this series during this episode. He previously appeared in Season 8 episode, The Simpsons spin-off Showcase. My best moment here was the ending. So, did Homer becoming intelligent do it for me? Yes it did, this is a 5 out of 5. This is honestly one of the funniest episodes I've seen in a while. I enjoyed the intro scene at the animation festival. It was cool to see the parody of anime and to see Homer in a motion capture suit. I also like the references to the Flintstones here with the old black and white cigarette commercials and the Great Gazoo. Homer's brief dabble in the stock market was also hilarious. I like the "we're in the money" dream that he has while he's making the trade. I also like the line, "I hope plunging means up and 75 means 200. That's just so dumb that it works perfectly. Homer doesn't stay down for too long after that though, as he has a crayon removed from his brain which boosts his intelligence. Now the continuity of that may be all wrong, and I'm not sure that we need an extra reason why Homer acts the way he does, as his personality has been pretty well established by now. Also, the whole explanation of how Dr. Hibbert missed it all these years was kinda dumb, let's be honest. For the sake of the plot though, I guess I can look the other way just this once. The main reason why I'm so lenient on it is that I enjoy seeing smart Homer try and fit in. He does become a bit of a know-it-all, so it is realistic that he would alienate his friends. But he gets to bond with Lisa a bit, in a way in which we had never really seen before. As I mentioned before, that ending is pretty good and pretty sweet really. Even if Homer did take the coward's way out, to go back to being stupid, he at least got to tell Lisa how he appreciated her in a whole new way after being intelligent. It was a solid way to round off a pretty good plot. As I've already touched on though, the comedy was just as good. Some of the other jokes I laughed at was the revelation that Homer's new IQ was only 105. Apparently that is good enough to be called a genius in Springfield. As well as Homer somehow accidentally proving to Flanders that God doesn't exist. Season 12, Episode 10, Pokey Mom. Marge, feeling sympathy for an inmate she meets at a prison rodeo, vouches for him at his parole hearing. He soon moves in with the Simpsons family. Meanwhile, Homer starts his own chiropractic business. So the story of this episode originated from the fact that the staff members wanted to do an episode about Marge without her getting a new job for a change. They felt that that concept had been seen on the show too often, and to be honest, I'm inclined to agree. My best moment was Homer's work as an unlicensed chiropractor. This one gets a 2 out of 5. This was a pretty bland plot overall, that had nothing to it really. I mean, Marge taking an interest in a prisoner that she perceives as having a gentle side is interesting on paper, it just don't really do anything with it though. I would have thought that it would have been a good chance to show off Marge's artistic side again, but they never really went in that direction. Instead we got a petty feud between Jack and Principal Skinner, neither of which you want to root for because they are both just so unlikable. The ending of Jack lying to Marge was also kind of predictable, and it made her seem like a gullible idiot to be honest. At least Homer's side plot was a bit more fun while it lasted. Homer heals people's backs by simply pushing them over a bin, and that was a fun watch. I also found the line, "No investor can bend like that, they're chiropractors," quite funny. Unfortunately though, that is the only joke of the episode that I did laugh at, because they were not really that good in the main. In the end, this was a boring episode that felt like a long watch. I just wish we got a bit more time with HOMYA's side plot, then things might have been different. Season 12, Episode 11. Worst episode ever. After Comic Book Guy suffers a heart attack, he leaves Bart and Milhouse in charge of his store while he is recovering. So some trivia for this one is that Hank Azaria won an Emmy for his portrayal as Comic Book Guy. And my best moment was just Bart and Milhouse running the comic book store. So this one gets a 3 out of 5. So we have an episode which focuses on Comic Book Guy, and given I do like the character, that was not a problem for me. I like how the story kicks into gear, in that the reason that he bans Milhouse and Bart from his store is so petty. All they did was stop him from ripping off Martin Prince's mum after all. The transition the episode makes into Bart and Milhouse in charge of the store is a bit weird. I mean, why would they be the ones that call the ambulance for Comic Book Guy? I mean, lots of the other adults witnessed Comic Book Guy have a heart attack. Didn't they call it for him? I guess the Springfieldians are even worse than I thought. The reason it happened aside though, I do like how Bart and Milhouse work together. Milhouse of course has his dorky moments, like buying 2,000 comic books just because the lead character is a nerd. That's such a Milhouse thing to do. He also has this weird fantasy sequence with Lisa, which was kind of interesting because it was shot in this noir-esque way. In terms of the comic book guy side of things, him pairing up with Agnes makes sense in a way. I mean, those two are the most cynical characters on the entire show, so it does make sense that they would get on. Their meanness can become a bit much though, so thankfully we only get a few small scenes of them together. The ending to this one does definitely fall into the lame category though. The police just arrest comic book guy and that is that. Given how status quo this show is, it made the rest of the episode seem rather pointless. As for the jokes, there were a few funny ones which I already mentioned, but other than that they kind of fall flat. In the end, this rounds up being an episode with okay moments that never really come together to make a good finished product. Season 12, Episode 12, Tennis the Menace. The Simpsons build a new tennis court, and soon everyone in Springfield comes to play. However, Marge gets tired of Homer causing her to lose every game and replaces him with Bart. So this episode's title is a pun on the comic strip character Dennis the Menace. And my favourite moment is just the rivalry between the family. This one gets a 2 out of 5. This was a bit of a weird one for me. I feel like they took the totally wrong approach with the story. To start off, we have a mediocre Act 1 with Grandpa at the funeral home. Sometimes these opening set pieces have funny moments, but that was not the case on this occasion. Things do pick up a bit once Homer actually gets to tennis court though. I like how they suddenly get all of the rich and famous people there playing. It kind of reminds me of when they got a pool in Bart of Darkness. I also like the rivalry aspect between the family. It is rare that we see two of the family members going up against the other two, so I was finding that side of things quite interesting. Some of the banter between Lisa and Marge especially was great, as we so rarely see those two characters lock heads. Sadly though, they never really went anywhere with it in the end. They built up this big match with Homer and Lisa against Bart and Marge, but we never even got to see it. Instead, the plot was hijacked by guest stars. These pro tennis players did not really add much, and they also just turned up at the last minute. It also doesn't help that I'm not really a tennis fan, so unlike other episodes which featured sports I do like, such as golf and boxing, I can't relate to this one as much. In terms of the jokes, they were very hit and miss, with more misses than hits. I did like some of the banter between the family at the dinner table, but the funniest joke of the episode came from Kent Brockman, when he mishears "it's my racket" as "I'm an Iraqi." Homer's reaction of "get off my property" was kind of quite funny in an unexpected way. I was just not expecting him to come out with that. Season 12, Episode 13, Day of the Jackanapes. Having discovered that Krusty has erased all of the tapes of his show involving him, Sideshow Bob schemes to hypnotize Bart to blow up Krusty live on air. So, my trivia here is that the game show Me Wanty, that Mo appears on, is a parody of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. My best moment was seeing some of Krusty's past TV career. I gave this episode a 3 out of 5. So we finally have another Bob episode, for the first time since Season 8's Brother from Another Series. I mentioned in that episode review that it was always going to be difficult to bring Bob back, given how that episode ended. So how did this episode handle it? It just ignored Bob's previous truce with Bart, and he was quite happy to kill him to get revenge on Krusty for taping over his episodes. Yeah, the motivation for Bob was kinda silly here, and his grand plan relied so heavily on hypnosis, which is hardly a great plot device, is it? The ending was also very abrupt. They just reveal that Bob is getting a death penalty and the episode ends there. I guess we're not supposed to care what happens after that. Despite all of these flaws with the story structure, I still somewhat enjoyed this episode. Maybe I'm just glad to have Bob back, I don't know. But he does bring his usual charm to the table. Some of his lines are just as snappy as ever, and I do love his psychotic rambling in front of the cops, who of course don't take any notice. Some of the other good moments include Bart's walk to the creepy side of the school playground, and those scenes of Krusty's past which I mentioned. Overall, this is an episode of great flaws, but as long as you don't take it too seriously, and just enjoy having Kelsey Grammer back on the show again, there is entertainment to be found. Season 12, Episode 14, New Kids on the Blecch. A music producer sets up Bart, Nelson, Milhouse and Ralph to be the next big boy band sensation. However, it soon becomes apparent that he has a sinister propaganda campaign in mind. So, the title of this episode is actually previously mentioned in the episode The City of New York vs. Homer Simpson. It is said by Alfred E. Newman when Bart visits the office of Mad Magazine. My favourite moment was the Party Posse's music video. So, Bart getting a boy band gets a 4 out of 5. Yeah, I know this might be an unpopular opinion, but I enjoyed this episode. I know a lot of people give it flack for an over-the-top plot and a random NSYNC appearance, but I still liked it. Don't get me wrong, it's not perfect by any means. The story is quick to jump from scene to scene, which kind of does mess with the pacing, and I do think that the ending with LT Smash blowing up the Mad Magazine headquarters was kind of dumb. So with that bad stuff out of the way, I'd better get on to explaining why I like this. Well, it helps that Bart's boy band actually has some fun songs. Even though they are cheesy and automated pop songs, I found them all to be quite catchy, and the Ivan Etny Arge has become a classic Simpsons bit. I like that whole angle of subliminal messages, and the Drop the Bomb music video was fantastic, and it was all put together in a clever way. With all of the bombs, missiles and Saddam references here, you could really tell that this episode was both early 2000s and pre 9/11. I also just like Lieutenant Smash as an antagonist. He's quite sinister, but he also has some funny moments. He's just so upfront and casual about it. I do like the scene where Lisa confronts him and so easily discovers his true intentions. The jokes here are reasonably good too. I did like the superliminal advertising, where he just casually shouts out of the window to Lenny and Carl to join the Navy. I also laughed at Homer stating that give peace a chance didn't have any meaning. I didn't even mind NSYNC's appearance really, to be honest. Sure, they add nothing to the plot, but I did like their over-the-top dramatic entrances, and the line, "I can't believe I'm meeting Milhouse," was pretty funny. So overall, when you add some funny moments to some memorable ones, this episode turns into something good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to join the Navy. Season 12, Episode 15, Hungry Hungry Homer. After Homer discovers that the Springfield isotopes are being moved to Albuquerque, he goes on a hunger strike outside the stadium. So, some trivia is that the title is a reference to the game Hungry Hungry Hippos. You've probably all heard of that game in some way, shape or form, but did you know that one of the hippos in that game is actually named Homer? And my best moment was the trip to Blockland. So this episode gets a 5 out of 5. And I must say that I gave this a 5 by the finest of margins. It was not pure gold like some other classic episodes, nor did it have as many standout moments, but it was just ever so solid. As I said, the trip to Blockoland as the opening set piece was a great way to start. It was not only a clever parody of Legoland, it brought out a few funny moments such as the River of Blocks and Marge saying Squaresville sounds pretty cool. It also leads into the main plot in a believable way when Homer gets Lisa's missing Eiffel Tower piece back. I like these kind of tangents that Homer goes on with his personality. We all know how impressionable he is, so I totally buy that he gets a good feeling for standing up for the little guys. I enjoyed a few scenes of him doing just that, but he meets his match with the Darth owner. Now, the idea of the Springfield isotopes moving to Albuquerque is a random one for sure, but the episode makes such a big deal out of it that I actually ended up caring what happened to the team. Homer's hunger strike is also entertaining and was full of funny jokes, my favourite being Homer's interaction with Milhouse and Kirk. The ending reveal was kind of convenient though. I mean, they really had Albuquerque napkins all along, that was kind of dumb. But hey, at least Homer's hard work paid off in the end, and Duffman took his side over the owners. Just a quick word on Duffman too. This was his finest ever appearance in my opinion. He was interesting whenever he was on screen, and even had a nice little character moment in the end. A final word goes to the ending of this episode, with the whole, "They'll play what I tell them to play, for I am the mayor of Albuquerque." I loved that because it was so obviously a joke, but it had the whole serious dramatic music playing over it. It kind of makes you wonder if that mayor really did have some kind of extra power that we were not in the know about. Season 12, Episode 16, Bye Bye Nerdie. Lisa's attempts to befriend a new student at Springfield Elementary called Francine result in her being constantly bullied. This leads her on a crusade to find out what makes bullies tick. So, some trivia is that this episode was originally titled Lisa the Bully, and the original idea saw Lisa attempting to prank Francine only to miss and accidentally hit Principal Skinner instead, resulting in her being sent to juvenile hall. That actually seemed like an interesting idea, to be honest. I'm not sure that they made the right decision to change it. My best moment was Drederick Tatum's cameo appearance. Episode 16 gets a 3 out of 5. This was probably at the high end of the 3, because it did have some good moments, and I was interested in seeing what became of Lisa's bully problem. But there are a few things which hold this back, so it is by no means one of my favourites either. The first of the two big problems was that the subplot of Homer trying to safe-proof everything was kind of boring. It had some silly scenes involving Maggie with a nail gun, and was just generally unfunny. There's also no real end to that story either. The second flaw here is the ending. I mean, the concept of there being some kind of chemical reason why bullies act the way they do towards nerds, and why they target them, that was interesting on paper, but it was just never expanded upon in a way that made it believable. That's probably because the whole explanation that Lisa gave only got a minute as the final scene. They really should have expanded on that a bit more. On to some more positive things. I did enjoy how Lisa played off other characters here. For example, she had a good scene with Nelson where they discussed bullies, and there's also a fun bit with groundskeeper Willie where he shows her the security tapes. My favourite scene though is when she sprays Frederick Tatum with a nerd scent. I love all of Tatum's lines in there, and just how he reacts to Nelson punching him in general. His reaction of, "You leave me little recourse," to Nelson pleading not to be hurt, got me laughing. In the end, this was relatively funny and interesting. It just has a few missteps, which does kind of leave me feeling frustrated, because it means that the episode never fully lives up to its potential. Season 12, Episode 17, Simpson Safari. Homer finds a gold giraffe in a box of 30-year-old animal crackers, which wins him and his family an African safari. So a bit of a factoid is that Frank Welker was brought in to do the animal voices in the episode. And my best moment was the Bag Boy strike. So this one gets a 1 out of 5. This has got to be a contender for the most boring episode of all time. Seriously, I will go on record and say that the jokes, if I can call them that are on show here, are the most obvious and low effort in the series history. And I'm even including the HD error in that, by the way, so that should give you some indication of just how bad they are. You have the warthog joke, of course, where Bart calls Lisa a warthog, which Lisa denies, but oh wait, there was actually a warthog in the car. Then you have Marge looking at a cheetah through binoculars, which, you guessed it, is actually right next to her. You also have a few more, like Carl wearing a tuxedo, after then he says that he's having a casual get-together. There's also even a giant spider that destroys a suitcase. I mean, I really could go on and on forevermore. I know me just listing the boring jokes does not make for a good review, but that's kind of what I'm reduced to here, because there is nothing else to work with. I mean, there was no plot going on to make up for the lackluster jokes. The family just kind of stumble around the African plains. Then, in Act 3, there is this monkey diamond mine that comes out of nowhere and is clearly just rushed. The ending of the episode also kind of implies that the family took the bribe of the diamonds from this crazy lady, which is kind of bad form from them when you think about the impact on the chimps. Honestly though, by that point I did not even really care anymore. I was just waiting for the episode to finally end. Just an absolute chore to sit through. Season 12, Episode 18, Trilogy of Error. We get to see a day in the life of Homer, Lisa and Bart. And as we follow the 3 different paths, they end up coming together. So some trivia is that the French class at Springfield Elementary practices with the phrase, "The Grenly mange les pommes," which means the frog eats a grapefruit in English. My best moment, which is kind of not a best moment because I couldn't really pick one, so it's just the general flow and momentum that the story has. This one gets a 5 out of 5. So, having a 3-part intertwining story is unique for The Simpsons, but it is very clever in how it is put together. The plot ends up being consistently interesting. Homer's Day is the first one that we see, and it does a good job at both setting up some big stakes and foreshadowing future reveals. Having Marge accidentally cut off his thumb is a good idea because it is quite a serious thing, so it makes perfect sense that they would be in such a rush to leave the house. After Homer gets drunk in Moe's, his rides keep leaving him, resulting in him walking to Shelbyville. I'm not sure how wise that decision is, to be fair, but there we go. And part 1 ends on a downer note, as Homer's farm is presumably lost and Lisa's robot lingo is seen destroyed. No sooner do we see that we get right back into Lisa's day, and if I'm honest, this is the weakest of the 3. Probably because we have to repeat a few scenes from earlier, and also this had to link into Bart's day as well as Homer's day, so because of that it's a bit light on jokes. Also, I did not really like the meeting a boy at West Springfield Elementary. That part felt kind of out of place, if I'm honest. At least it is fun to watch her link up with Marge, which of course results in them stealing Cletus's truck. Bart's story, while having some ties to the other two, is easily the most standalone of the three, which is kind of fitting given that he was the one to leave first at breakfast. I mean, we do get the great payoff to the 1, 2, 3 fake streak gag, and Lisa does inadvertently blow their cover. But other than that, this is purely just Bart and Milhouse finding fireworks, and then getting chased by the mob. The ending of all three stories come together may not make much sense from a time perspective, but hey, I can forgive that given how well it works. And I would say that even though she doesn't get a day centered around her, Marge is easily the MVP here throughout. I love how she is always involved with each story. It really goes to show that she is always on the lookout for her family, always there to help if need be. Anyway, enough of me praising the plot, the jokes here are also pretty good. You have a number of good ones from side characters such as Wiggum's various lines, which often foreshadow things. You also have Ned reading Harry Potter to Todd, and my personal favourite, Inflammable Means Flammable, what a country, from Dr. Nick. Overall, this is really a great episode, which I would recommend you to check out. You really do need to see it for yourself to understand just how well it flows, and how well the previous plot points come up again later in the episode. It was clear that a lot of thought went into this from the writers. Season 12, Episode 19, I'm Going to Praiseland. Ned finds a sketchbook that contains Maud's vision of a Christian-themed amusement park called Praiseland. He decides to build the park to make Maud's dream a reality. So, my trivia, which is kind of more of a mistake here, is that when the citizens are leaving the park, you can see Manjula behind Apu, and she has yellow skin here, with brown hair and is wearing blue clothes, unlike her usual dark skin, black hair and red dress. My best moment was Disco Stew's version of Heaven. This one gets a 2 out of 5, and it is kind of a shame to give this a 2 because I thought that the premise for the plot was actually decent. Having Ned trying to both get over Maud and fulfill her dream of an amusement park was interesting. They could have used this to develop his character and really flesh out why he's so obsessed about her. Now, I know the answer may seem obvious. She was his wife after all, but he takes it to such an extreme in this episode that it is honestly a bit creepy, the way he cuts Rachel's hair at night to make her look like Maud, and keeps her indentation in the bed. So yeah, sadly we don't really end up getting an interesting look at Ned here. Even though Ned does kind of move on in the end, we never see his new girlfriend Rachel again after this, so it kind of makes the whole relationship feel a bit redundant. In terms of the scenes at the park, with the whole gas leaks and hallucinations, much like Ned's ice cream flavours, they were a bit bland. The hallucinations being caused by a gas leak was a bit weird, but hey, it did bring us Skinner and Disco Stew's version of Heaven, which were the funniest bits of the episode. The use of the orphans, though, felt like a cheap attempt to elicit some emotion from the viewer, and because of that, it never worked. Overall, this was a disappointing episode that just seemed a bit lightweight, really, especially with the jokes. It just never come together to be anything good. Season 12, Episode 20, Children of a Lesser Clod. Homer injures himself while playing basketball and needs surgery. While recovering at home, he finds out that he is good at taking care of kids. So much so that he starts a daycare center. So some trivia is that this episode was actually advertised as featuring Ron Howard in what would have been his third appearance on The Simpsons. However, he did not end up appearing at all. My best moment was the basketball game at the start. This one is a 3 out of 5. I think this is actually the hardest one to rank to date, because it was well on course for a 4 at least. It was very entertaining and had good jokes in the main. However, as is tradition of late, it goes a bit off the rails in Act 3. So let's try and start off with the good first. Act 1 was very funny. It had that basketball game with Carl being great, and Homer injuring his ankle in a funny way. From there, we also have some good scenes of Homer babysitting for Rod and Todd. It is nice to see him actually bond with them, and he's even nice to Ned for a change. Also, because he had fun spending time with the kids, and had nothing better to do with his ankle healing, it kind of made perfect sense for him to open a daycare business. So because of that, I found the scenes with Homer and the kids, just having a good time, to be very believable. However, the plot point of Bart and Lisa getting jealous was the complete opposite. It felt very contrived, and the way they sabotaged him made Lem seem unlikable instead of Homer. Not to be outdone though, Homer soon goes and undoes all of the good work from earlier. He runs away with the kids, which leads to that silly car chase, resulting in Homer crashing a van and trying to escape. Yeah, that really was as dumb as it sounds. To make matters worse, that gets no follow-up either. The final scene of the episode is just Homer back in the house, making up with Bart and Lisa. They wanted to go back to the status quo, of course, but they did not bother to put in the work to make it make sense. Homer faced no consequences for his actions, and Bart and Lisa suddenly drop all of the bad feelings that they had towards him. So yeah, that third act did sour my experience with the episode. But as I said, the first two acts I did enjoy, and the jokes were decent. I never even mentioned some fun back and forth between Kent Brockman and Arnie Pye in the sky. These kind of things do make the episode watchable overall. Season 12, Episode 21, Simpsons Tall Tales. The family wins a trip to Delaware, but Homer refuses to pay tax on a ticket home, so they hitch a ride on a train and meet a hobo who tells them some tales. So some trivia was that originally Jim Carrey was supposed to guest star as the hobo. However, schedule issues prevented him from coming on the show, so Hank Azaria voiced him instead. My best moment was the fake out ending to the Tom Sawyer story. So the season finale gets a 3 out of 5. So this is another non-Treehouse of Horror 3-parter that is kind of starting to become an annual tradition of the show. And this one is very average, which explains the rating. Part 1 about a giant homo was simple enough. I liked seeing how we created various national landmarks and the awkward sex joke with Marge. The ending to this story with the meteorite was kind of dumb though. The Connie Appleseed story was quite fun. I like how relentless Homer was in his buffalo killing, and how he delighted in eating the apples when he thought that they were buffalo testicles. The Tom Sawyer story overall was not the best though. It felt like they were going through the motions, and we got the same chase scene of them running from the townspeople at least 2 times. As I said though, I did like that kind of dark, fake out ending, when it cuts to them smiling above their funeral, only to be revealed that their bodies were actually being lowered into the coffins. Now, I've already mentioned pretty much all of the jokes that I liked, but some definitely worked better than others. You had a few which were too obvious, and the attempted running gag of Homer bathing the hobo was simply not funny, and it was beaten totally into the ground. After all is said and done, we are left with a somewhat interesting end to the season that does just enough to keep me interested. So that is all the season 12 episodes done, and here is the season summary. The overall average score for the season was 3.14, which was a fair bit up from last year, to be fair. My bottom 5 for the season was Insane Clown Poppy was 5th, Tennis the Menace was 4th, Homer vs Dignity was 3rd, Pokey Mom was 2nd, and Simpson Safari was by far the worst of the season. In terms of my top 5, The Computer Wore Menace Shoes was 5th, New Kids on the Blecch was 4th, Hungry Hungry Homer was 3rd, Trilogy of Error was 2nd, and HOMR was number 1. So, what do I think of this season overall? If I had to put a stamp on it, it would probably get a meh. There is some good and bad stuff here, and overall a standard kind of balances out to being average. But Simpson Safari aside, even the worst episodes were not horrible, and the top 2 of the season were just classics in their own right. Not just by this season standards by the way, but by any season standards really. Because of this, I come away from this season reasonably happy. And if you are a Simpsons fan, this season is probably worth a watch. Don't get me wrong, compared to a few seasons back, this is not in the same league, but from here on in, I'm no longer going to compare these seasons to the classic era. Not only is that kind of unfair, I also feel like it will get tiresome and stale if I constantly do that every time. So if the kind of standard on show in this set of episodes continues through the teen seasons, then I will be content with that, and I will be happy to watch them. In terms of how the characters fared this season, I feel like this year did a good job of giving each family member their time to shine. Homer has several episodes about him as usual, but Lisa, Bart and Marge all got 2 spotlight episodes each here, and it was really nice to see. We often get a bit shortchanged, of Marge and Lisa especially, so it was nice to see them get a fair chance here. Another thing I noticed about this season compared to last, was that this one was generally a bit more focused than last season. When they had a premise here, they did tend to run with it more so than last season, which had episodes which were here, there and everywhere. Don't get me wrong, there were a few wacky episodes here, of course there were, but even those episodes seemed to have more of a kind of solid plot structure than the episodes of last season. Anyway, that about rounds up my thoughts on season 12. Next up is, you guessed it, season 13. I kind of expected more of the same to be honest, so I hope you can join me for that one. Thanks for watching guys, and as always, take care.